In this video, we're going to show you how we feed our fish. It seems like something so simple, but if we get this right, it can reduce a lot of potential problems. It can help our fish live longer, stay healthier, and reduce aggression. So we're going to show you what we do, so stay tuned. So one of the reasons why we're doing this video, we've gotten some questions about how we're able to keep aggressive fish together without them beating each other up. And some of our community tanks have a very interesting mix where we've got some larger fish mixed in with some smaller ones, and the smaller ones are not being eaten. One of the reasons we're able to do that is the way in which we feed our fish. But not only that, I think it keeps our fish healthy. It makes sure that all the fish are getting the food that they need. And so we're going to show you how we do that. Now, we've done videos on how to feed fish in the past. I'll put that in the description below. It's a very comprehensive video on types of fish foods that we use in our fish room. Some things have changed since then. In the last few months, we have been using exclusively Northfin Foods in our fish room and like them very much for a number of reasons. One, we like the fact that there are no fillers in the food, no artificial colors. The protein concentrations are awesome. The ingredients are top notch. And so we've really had good luck in the last few months. Northfin is a channel sponsor. We thank them very much for sponsoring this channel. If you're interested in using Northfin Foods, maybe trying something new, we'll put a link down in the description below. You can buy them through flipaquatics.com online. Definitely worth checking out if you're interested in trying something different. So I'm not sure how many of you have thought about actually having a plan for feeding your fish, but we do. With over 65 fish tanks in our fish room, we have a lot of diversity in terms of dietary needs. We have a lot of different sizes of fish, and sometimes we mix them together. And so what we do is we have a very methodical way in which we go about feeding our fish. First thing, and this especially pertains to tanks like the 150 or the Oscar 125, where we've got some larger fish mixed in with some smaller ones. The first thing we do is we feed a larger type of fish food. And so a good example of that would be this, the Northfin Tropical Sticks. These are great foods. This is an awesome food where it's about 40% protein or so. And what I like about it is it's a larger food. It's roughly 3 millimeters. And so you could see here in the 150, the first thing we have to do is we have to feed this larger food that's going to float to the larger fish in the tank. So you can see the tinfoil barbs, the ballast shark, the severums. They like to eat this food. Now, some of the smaller fish are not going to go for this food. So we've got emperor tetras, the gourami. For the most part, the angelfish won't go for this. But at least what we can do here is those really aggressive eaters, we can fill their bellies first so that later on, when we're trying to feed the other fish, they're not trying to compete with very fast, very aggressive eating fish like the tinfoil barbs and the ballast shark. The same thing holds true in our 125. We've got some large fish in that tank, namely the Oscar and the tilapia. These fish eat a lot of food, and they eat it really aggressively and very quickly. And so here, these tropical sticks are going to give them the food that they need so that later on, when we feed the smaller fish, they're not trying to compete with the larger ones. We'll even use these sticks in some of our peacock tanks when we've got some size differences or when the peacocks are larger. But the idea here is let's go ahead, let's feed all the fish that can feed from the top of the tank, the large aggressive feeders. And that way, when we feed smaller foods, the smaller fish will have an opportunity to eat. Now keep in mind, with all the tanks we have in our fish room, only the tanks that have larger fish are getting those tropical sticks. The next thing we often do is we'll feed something like this. And this is our Northfin, either community or cichlid flake. We'll alternate between the two. And again, great food, no artificial colors, very few binders. The fish really utilize the nutrients that are in this food. Love the ingredient profile. But now what we do is we take this food and we add it to the tanks. What's happening here is, yes, the larger fish are still going to eat the flake food, but they're not going at it as aggressively as if we had just put this in first, and that's providing an opportunity for some of the medium-sized fish and some of the fish that are mid-water. They can now feed as well, because this flake, while it floats, it will also sink, and that provides a lot of food for our mid-water fish and our smaller fish. And of course, you could see that here in the 150, you could see it in the 125. Now we're able to feed a larger group of fish, and the larger ones are they're not going at it as aggressively. So now that we've taken care of our super aggressive large fish, we've taken care of our smaller mid-water fish that really can't go after that larger food, the next thing that we're going to do is maybe feed something like this. And this is a cichlid pellet, but they have tropical fish pellets as well. But this food, again, really good. These are smaller sinking pellets, and they come in different sizes, anywhere from 1 to 3 millimeters. But because this is sinking, now what we can do, and we generally use 1 to 2 millimeters, so it's pretty small. It actually depends on the size of the fish in the tank, but anywhere from 1 to 3 millimeters. But this stuff is going to sink, and so now our catfish are getting more food, our clown loaches. Maybe you've got some plecos in the tank that are active during the day, and now they can feed. And the larger fish are, for the most part, going to ignore these smaller foods, because at this point, they've had the large sticks or any type of large floating pellet, and they've also had their flake foods. They're not going to go after the bottom foods quite as much. And so now what we've done is we've ensured that all the fish in our tank have had something to eat. The other food that we will often feed is this Bug Pro. This is Northfin Bug Pro. This is good stuff. It will stay floating for a few minutes or a minute or so, and then it will start to sink. And so we will usually feed this towards the end of our feeding cycle in a tank as well. Especially good for a lot of our bottom feeders like our catfish. Our plecos really love this food. And so again, we're making sure that all the fish are getting the food that they need. Now at this point, we're ready to feed our live foods for the tanks that need them. And so obviously we're not feeding live foods in our Oscar tank. There's no need for that, or the 150. However, in the multi-tank, in the Cyprichromis tank, in a lot of our shell dweller tanks for that matter, we're gonna go ahead and feed live baby brine. Now, in those smaller tanks, we don't need to feed the large floating pellets, but we've already fed our flake food. And again, that's feeding all the adults, because it's especially important as you're feeding live baby brine. We really want to make sure the fry in that tank are getting enough food to eat. If you give the adults flake food first, they're not going to go after the live baby brine as aggressively. And so here you could see our multis are getting the live baby brine. Yes, the adults are still eating it, but the fry at least have some food to eat as well. The Cyprichromis is the same way. And so we'll feed the live baby brine to all the tanks in which we have fry or juveniles. But all the flake food has been fed already. All right, the last thing we're going to do, if you've got plecos in your tank or you've got fish that don't generally come out during the day, they're still going to need to eat. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that we can make, especially when it comes to algae eating fish like certain types of plecos, is think that they're just going to eat whatever's in the tank, whatever's stuck to the glass, and that's going to allow them to survive. And if our tanks are relatively algae free, they're probably not going to get the food they need, and what can happen over time is they're just going to starve and die. If you're finding that all the fish in your tank are eating the food and not leaving anything left over for your plecos, what we typically do is we will feed our plecos after the lights go off. That's the same thing as if we've got catfish in the tank that come out at night. So maybe you've got some shy clown loaches or other types of catfish where you really don't see them active during the day, but at night they come out. So one of the things that we do, we have these are the kelp wafers. And by the way, if you're going to get an algae wafer, make sure the algae wafer just isn't a green pellet of regular fish food. You're going to want to make sure that the algae wafer actually has plant-based materials as their first ingredients. So what we'll do with these algae wafers in mixed tanks is we will make sure that they go in after the lights go off. So for instance, our Mbuna tank, those fish love algae wafers. If I put them in while the lights are on, they're going to consume all of them before the plecos ever have a chance to eat. So the algae wafers that we feed in that tank have to go in after the lights go off, because the Mbunas aren't going to eat after the lights come off. The same would be true if you want to use sinking pellets instead of wafers occasionally for your plecos or your catfish. Put that in after the lights go off. How will you know if you've added enough food? What we usually do, if you put the food in at night and you come down in the morning and it's gone, you know that the fish that are active at night have consumed everything. If, however, you come down and you've got a mess on your substrate, then maybe you've overfed your fish, at least the fish that would eat at night, and you might want to back off. So now that you know how we feed, the next question is how often. We typically feed our fish twice a day. Once right around 7 a.m. in the morning, and again somewhere between 9 and 10 p.m. at night. That's giving our fish smaller feedings multiple times a day, and again, I think that goes a long way in reducing aggression. When we talk about fish aggression, they're usually competing for resources. That can be food, it can be space, it can be mates, it can be structure. We're able to reduce that aggression because they're not as hungry. And that's one of the reasons why when you look at the 125 and we've got this large tilapia, this large Oscar, and we've got all these tiny fish, they're not eating them because they're properly fed. This has been one of the most productive tanks that we have in our fish room in regard to producing OB fry. We've got these Midas cichlids in here that are relatively small and yet no issues. All right, everyone, I hope you found that useful. If you did, share, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.